Hello, good evening or good day, depending where you are. Welcome, and most appropriate tune there from Oliver Mtukuzi, especially for you people out there. Zogai, come back home when things are right, I suppose. So welcome to you all, the 500 on the Zoom platform, and thousands others on the Facebook live streaming. There is a particular significance tonight in this policy dialogue, the second in the series, and we're looking at the diaspora, harnessing Zimbabwe's diaspora towards the national settlement. The significance is quite poignant. First of all, we're talking about 25% of Zimbabweans outside the country, roughly about 4 to 5 million people. More significant, 70 to 75% of skilled and professional Zimbabweans are outside the country, and includes the people here on the panel, 3 panelists, and of course the moderator. Plus, if I may add, it adds to the indispensability of the diaspora to the economic recovery of Zimbabwe. And in particular, one might add that there can be no national settlement in Zimbabwe without that large chunk of our population. And indeed, if we have been remissive in the past, we want to take this occasion of this discussion to reiterate the importance of the Zimbabwe's diaspora to national development. We have to help us this evening 4 very able panelists. Godfrey Kanyenze, one of our leading development economists in Zimbabwe, a passionate disciple of economic and social justice. It is almost impossible to have a discussion on such a topic as the diaspora without Godfrey. We've done so much work on the diaspora. We have our young Zimbabwean, young scholar, Chipo Dendere, in the US. She's done some work on the diaspora as part of her PhD. And more important, she's very engaged, like most of you out there, with the Zimbabwean situation at home. Thirdly, we have Tendai Dumbuchena, a Zimbabwean South African, or South African Zimbabwean, who is very familiar with the Zimbabwean terrain. For many years, he was involved with crisis in the Zimbabwe coalition. And he's been working in South Africa, close enough to the situation in South Africa, in which he has had a close an intimate relationship with the Zimbabwean diaspora in its many facets, and including the very varied demographic spread of Zimbabweans across not only South Africa, but also the region. Last but not least, Yvonne Mahlunga Washawan, a human rights lawyer, activist, and a very passionate political, what shall I call you, Yvonne? Politician, based in the UK. Then of course we have our very able moderator, Evalet Gonda, also out there in London. We are assisted by a very efficient team here, led by Robert, my son in the background, Tony, Rila, Michelle Akata, and Tandy Ndlovu. With that, I will now hand you over to Violet to take over the show. Violet Gonda.
Thank you, Dr. Ibo Mandaza, for the introductions, or should I say Comrade Ibo. I understand you don't like to be called Dr. Mandaza, so I'll try and just call you Comrade Ibo. Thank you for the introductions as we continue with the SAPIES Trust Policy Dialogue series on Zimbabwe's deepening crisis and what we have to do now. As Dr. Mandaza said, today's main theme is harnessing Zimbabwe's diaspora towards the national settlement. And the fundamental question we'll be asking is, what does the Zimbabwe diaspora really want, and what is it prepared to do? We will start with presentations from our 4 panelists, followed by a question and answer segment, which will include contributions from a number of discussants selected from various regions who will engage on key issues. As Comrade Ibo has pointed out in his opening remarks, we need to get policy recommendations on the way forward for Zimbabwe. To our viewers, as usual, would like to hear your thoughts on this. You can get in touch via the SAPES Facebook page where we are live streaming. To those following on Zoom, we would like you to ask questions or contribute directly by raising your hands, and we'll try and get a few of you to contribute. And it's my pleasure to introduce our first panelist, who's researcher Godfrey Kanyinze. He is one of the leading development economists and passionate advocate for social and economic justice in Zimbabwe. He comes on this panel as one who has studied the Zimbabwean diaspora over the last decade, including policy recommendations on how the country can harness a sector that now constitutes almost 75% of all skilled and professional Zimbabweans, not to mention the 5 billion in remittances. Mr. Kanyinze, it's over to you.
Thank you so very much, Violet. I'm so excited to be on this platform to discuss this very critical issue. I would like to begin by just highlighting the importance of the diaspora, why it's such a significant sector that we should spend so much time, 2 hours of our time, discussing this evening. Up to the late 1990s, the general discourse around the diaspora was highly negative. It was basically informed by the negative aspects of brain drain, the hemorrhage that was associated with the massive exodus of especially skilled people from their home countries. But however, at the turn of the new millennium, the skeptical perception changed to a very positive one, emanating mainly from the developments that happened then. Firstly, it became very clear that diaspora contributions to development had escalated. For instance, there was an exponential growth in remittances coming from the diaspora at the turn of the millennium, such that right now, the contributions of diaspora in terms of remittances globally is more than double the levels of overseas development assistance. So we are talking of a very, very significant sector that is contributing essentially even more than what developing countries are receiving from the developed countries. It became also very clear that labor exporting countries were benefiting immensely from the resources, the wealth of those in the diaspora. For instance, quite a number of countries, including India, Israel, and other countries on the African continent, started leveraging the financial capacity of the diaspora through diaspora bonds and other financing mechanisms, which were highly generous based on patriotic dividends, where people would say because they have got knowledge of their countries, the issue of risk will be reduced and the financing mechanisms will be quite favorable. So it became very clear that the diaspora had advantages, especially where it was well connected, and there were deliberate measures by the home countries to ensure that they maximize the potential of that diaspora. What is also very critical is that remittance flows provided a very, very important contribution to most developing countries' balance of payments by making sure that foreign currency, which is very scarce, was improved. So the diaspora community highlighted or contributed significantly in terms of the inflows of foreign currency into their home countries. It also helped in terms of the information base it's very clear from the Asian tigers, those so-called developmental or East Asian economies, where they were able to exploit the strategic positioning of their diaspora, especially in the West. The diaspora became a node of information, a source of strategic trade information, and also products that were in need in the Western markets. So in essence, the developmental states of Asia took advantage of its diaspora to leverage a pro-trade approach where the diasporians provided the networks within the markets with information on requirements of those markets, as well as the products that were required in those markets. So essentially, the diaspora remittances also were seen as a stable source of resources. If you look at other private capital inflows, they are highly volatile. They depend on the economic temperature. If there is a downturn, then the levels of private investment flows are affected. If there are political upheavals, that also affects private capital flows, because capital is a coward. It doesn't flow into places where it's not quite certain. But with diaspora remittances, because of the linkages with the home countries, the diasporians are compelled to assist their home countries. So essentially, that wholly negative dimension or approach to the diaspora changed in the millennium, where it was now seen effectively that the diasporians could also provide a basis for investment. They were a potential entrepreneurial group that could also invest in their home countries, and this was also seen as highly beneficial. So you have already highlighted the size of the Zimbabwean diaspora, which is quite large, at almost a quarter of our population, at up to 5 million Zimbabweans that are living and working abroad. So this is a potent resource for our development, in the sense that if you look at the numbers that are coming even from the central, from government, it's very clear that the profile of those people that have migrated is quite interesting, in the sense that 73% of those 5 million Zimbabweans abroad have at least some secondary education, and almost 7% of them have got post-secondary education. So in essence, if you also consider that 71% of them are young people in the age group 20 to 34, this is a young, dynamic age group that is highly productive, that is highly skilled and educated as well. So in essence, the Zimbabwean diaspora on its own, also given what you have highlighted, that it constitutes almost 75% of the skills that have actually gone out of the country. So this is a significant resource that Zimbabwe could take advantage of. If you look at the numbers that are coming from the central bank, the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, it's very clear that the contribution of the diasporians in terms of remittances has really salvaged the situation in Zimbabwe. Without diasporian contribution, Zimbabwe could have collapsed. So Zimbabweans in the diaspora have acted as a form of social protection for the Zimbabweans that are languishing in poverty back home. So this is a very, very significant and important factor. Even if you look at the data from the central bank, and this data is incomplete in the sense that it is only looking at the formal channels, the remittances that have been flowing from the formal channels, where the levels have increased from 300 million in 2009, peaking at 939 million in 2015. However, as a result of the challenges in some of the source markets, in particular South Africa, given the depreciation of the rand, the levels have actually declined slightly to 619 million. But however, the real significance can be seen if you look at the contribution of the remittances that are diasporians, people like yourself, Violet, that are sending home, constitutes in terms of our liquidity. 60% of Zimbabwe's liquidity emanates from export earnings. And the second largest source of our liquidity in the country are diaspora remittances are averaging 30%. The next contributor is actually foreign direct investment, and surprise, surprise, at only 5%. So you can see, if you compare and contrast the contribution to liquidity of the diasporans at almost 30% of total liquidity in the economy, you contrast with what foreign direct investment is providing at only 5%, and you contrast with overseas development assistance coming into the country, whether including humanitarian assistance, which basically is way below, since 2014, way below what diasporans are contributing into the country. So it becomes very, very clear that diaspora remittances in Zimbabwe have been a critical source of subsistence for a large section of our population and families in Zimbabwe. However, it is important to note that even though this contribution is already huge from what I've already said, however, it's still suboptimal in the sense that we haven't even looked at the unofficial flows, which come in the forms of through unofficial channels and also through the irregular migrants, especially in South Africa. That is not at all documented. So if you look at the documented and undocumented, official and unofficial contribution, then we're talking of something even much bigger than what I've already said. So essentially, this is a potent developmental factor in the affairs of our nation as a country. But however, the challenge has been that for the diaspora to contribute effectively, they must feel a sense of belonging. They must feel a sense of confidence in their country. And this is the missing link in Zimbabwe, where because of the nature of the circumstances that led to people emigrating out of the country, the relationship with the home country at a political level, at a governance level, is very much characterized by an unease tension, in the sense that you recall even the former president would say, would mock people in the diaspora, saying that they are washing old people, you know, bags and all those things that were said about diasporians and so forth, which reflect the tension that exists between the diaspora, Zimbabwean diaspora, and our own political leadership. So what is critical to enhance that role is to build the confidence through, for example, things like allowing diasporans to vote, allowing dual citizenship. So there's a struggle right now because the Constitution, whilst it permitted dual citizenship, but however, this has not been facilitated, which has created challenges in terms of the relationships. It is also important to adopt and implement measures that promote the development policy framework. For example, we need to be clear in terms of the policies that should harness, that should be put in place to harness the contributions through, for instance, remittances. So aside that, that contribution is not entirely for consumption, because at the moment, the bulk of what is coming in is basically going towards consumption, towards healthcare, towards education, etc. And very little is going towards investment. So that is one area where Zimbabwe needs to put a lot of effort to ensure that the flows in terms of remittances are coming through the official channels and not necessarily through unofficial channels that may be highly risky. So it's also very important to ensure, like what other countries are doing, Philippines, for example, they are promoting the skilled people who are living outside their country to come back even on temporary projects to assist the country. For example, in Zimbabwe, in 2008, at the outbreak of the cholera pandemic, Zimbabwe, the International Organization of Migration, facilitated the return of medical doctors, medical personnel to assist with dealing with the cholera outbreak. So this is an example of what the whole diaspora can do, especially given the extent and the exposure of that diaspora to the external markets, which are very critical in terms of our catching up. So the diaspora is very critical, especially for Zimbabwe, given that we are lagging behind everyone else. So it provides us with a unique opportunity to catch up, in the sense that it shortens the learning curve, because you have been exposed to functional economies in the UK, in America, in New Zealand, in South Africa, and elsewhere. So you can bring to bear that knowledge on a dysfunctional economy back home. So you can imagine what a nurse who is working in the National Health Service in the UK can do to Pararenyatwa, can do to Harare Hospital, given the experience and knowledge that they've already acquired. So it is in this regard, in this respect, that the diaspora is so critical a factor, even in terms of the national settlement, in terms of also engaging them, even in the current discourses that are on the ground. We've got the concerned citizens that are looking at how we can move this economy forward. We've got the churches that have been calling for a Sabbath on elections, so that we deal with the huge legacy of the issues that we haven't resolved in the past, the negative legacies of the liberation struggle, the negative legacies of colonialism, the negative legacies of the post-independence conflicts that we've endured, there's not been any healing, no reconciliation has taken place. So you can imagine what Tendai Dumbuchena could bring to this discussion, given the experiences in South Africa with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. You can see what other, Zimbabweans, for example, you saw a group of Zimbabweans, the so-called Diaspora Infrastructure Development Group, coming up with a proposal to with Transnet to assist the National Railways of Zimbabwe through a $400 million facility, US dollar facility. But unfortunately, through corruption, through demands for kickbacks, that facility, that proposal could not see the light of day. So essentially, I could end by simply highlighting and underlining that Zimbabwe needs its diaspora, just like other countries have done. In conclusion, just look at examples like recently China. How China, when it was transitioning from a socialist to a capitalist economy with Chinese characteristics, how they leveraged their diaspora that was in the West. And in fact, they were now promoting actively the emigration of their people, and they were sending hordes of Chinese to go and learn in the West, to go and learn the ways of the West. And when they came back to China, they then developed a capitalist system that is now even out-competing the capitalist economies of the West. So you can see within a short space of time how China was able to override and basically overtake even economies like the UK. Now it's breathing down the nose of the USA. So you can see the role that the diaspora can play in terms of catapulting an economy to ensure that we leapfrog our development processes. So this is critical, and I think it's important that we bring in the diaspora as a critical factor in the discussions on the way forward in Zimbabwe. Can you just imagine tonight what could happen if we were to create a conducive governance framework in Zimbabwe? If we were to create a more connected diaspora with its homeland, what could happen to this country with the levels of education, the potential for remittances, the potential for human capital skills that are embodied in the diasporans? It is unbelievable what this country could do with its diaspora. Thank you, Violet.
Thank you, Godfrey. That number, the 5 million number, we've heard it for so many years now, that there are more than 5 million Zimbabweans outside the country. But is it really known how many Zimbabweans are outside, or we are just dealing with assumptions here? Because that's almost half, the population.
I've worked with the officials who have assisted in the development of the migration policy. What is very clear is that the numbers are not known, simply because we use the Department of Immigration and Control to collect the data. But when people emigrate, they don't state the reasons why they are leaving the country. And the majority of the emigrants, especially in neighboring countries like South Africa, are irregular migrants. They are undocumented migrants. So then it means that we don't even have an idea, an inkling in terms of the total stock of diasporians from Zimbabwe.
On that issue of statistics, even Emily on Zoom is saying that she's got a statistical question for you. She says, Kanyenze mentioned that remittances are higher than we know, but how do we know that exactly? Where are we getting these stats from?
Well, we know because, as I have indicated, I've given you the official numbers that are documented from the Reserve Bank, which the Reserve Bank also agrees that these are gross underestimates. Let me give you an example from South Africa, which is nearby. Right now, because of the high cost of commodities, almost most people are now buying or getting commodities from South Africa through diasporans. You know, the Malaysians. They can bring anything alive or dead. They can bring dead bodies, anything is so convenient to your doorsteps. That's the level of the undocumented aspect of the remittances. And those remittances may be in the form of cash or in the form of goods. So in essence, it's very clear that the numbers that we have are gross underestimates. And generally on that score, Violet, there's agreement that the numbers are a gross underestimate.
So is the legitimacy of the diaspora difficult to understand?
The legitimacy?
Yeah.
Well, it's not. The challenge basically is it almost mirrors what is happening at home, where because of the polarization, where because of the toxic politics, etc., the perceptions sometimes are that the people that went into the diaspora may not be supporters of the ruling party, and hence that's why you've got problems in giving them political rights like the right to vote. You remember when the new dispensation came in, the president and the Minister of Foreign Affairs were moving around, countries, even in the diaspora, Angola, etc. And the key question that kept on being asked was, when are we going to also vote as diasporans? Are you going to allow us to be dual citizens so that we can maximally contribute to the development of our country? So that's the general challenge, the lack of effective connectivity at the political leadership, linking the diaspora with the home country.
I was actually going to ask that last question that, patriotic dividend is only economic or political and democratic.
Well, it has to start with the political level, where people feel they are loved, they are wanted. It's not if I just come to you because I just want your remittances, then you refuse to send your remittances. You refuse to play ball. But where you are acknowledged as an important, that's why I started by really underlying the significance of the diaspora. The importance of that is to underscore the fact that if you are that critical for the development of this country, then you should also be accorded the political rights, the right to participate in elections, the right to enjoy your citizenship rights as well.
Thank you, Godfrey. Let's now hear from Chipo Dendere, a Zimbabwean academic, a professor of political science at Wellesley University in the USA. And Chipo's PhD studies were on the impact of the exodus of Zimbabwean skilled and professionals in the country, both politically and economically. And also, Chipo, I must add that she's multitasking today. She just had a baby a couple of weeks ago, so she's actually here with the new baby. So congratulations, Chipo.
Thank you. So our little feminist is just taking a nap, but I think very soon she'll be screaming and we should be hearing her. This is really exciting because this is my work. This is what I do for a living. I study the diaspora. So the question on statistics is right up my alley. And we do have the numbers, right? But I'll come back to that later. So when I was preparing for this, I was trying to think about how to frame this because you don't want to insult people. That's one of the things I've learned about Zimbabweans is that we don't want to insult you. But I do want to frame this in speaking about how political parties have responded to the diaspora. So in my earlier work, one of the things that we looked at was an argument that one of the reasons why ZANU-PF has stayed in power for so long is because people emigrated, right? So I argued that when people leave, so whether people are leaving because they are going abroad or people are leaving politics because they are afraid to participate or people are leaving politics because they're dying. So my new book is going to be looking at the impact of HIV and how death actually allowed ZANU-PF to survive. But just focusing on migration, so the numbers are a bit debated, but where we get the numbers of how many people have left are different sources. So the first source are the host countries. So we get data of official entries from countries like South Africa, the United States, the United Kingdom, which are the top entry countries. And I know that the next response is going to be, well, what about all the other border jumpers, right? So unofficial immigrants that we don't have statistics on. A second way to get data on how many people have left is to look at the applications for residency in host countries. So in the United Kingdom, for example, we have a lot of data from the early 2000s on asylum seekers. We also have data on new citizens. So for the United Kingdom and the US, we're able to get data from that because these are countries that keep track of their statistics. So that's another way. And then in terms of how do we get the data for remittances, so there've been a number of good surveys out there. So for South Africa, we have Professor Makina, who's collected extensive data. And from his data, we know that the average migrant in South Africa was sending between $100 and $300 a month. And those numbers obviously have fluctuated. We know that in the recent months since February, because of the COVID-19, remittances have actually gone down, obviously, because the people that would be remitting, some of them have lost jobs. And so people are not able to send money. So in South Africa, that's Professor Makina. You can look up his information. We also have data from Queen's University in Canada. So they've done a lot of data collection over the years. One of the sources that I use a lot is Dominic Pasura's data, and he's done work on the Greater London area. And then I've done work mostly in the US, so interviews. And so, of course, with all of these data sets, right, we are all interviewing a small population of people, but ideally our data is somewhat representative of the broader diaspora population. So now thinking about how can the diaspora contribute to the country, part of what I'm interested in right now is what are political parties doing to engage the diaspora? Back in 2010, when I was collecting research for my PhD, what I found at the time is that almost 70% of the people that I was talking to were saying that they supported the MDC, or they were actively involved with the MDC, or they had some kind of membership with the MDC. And at the time, a standout statistic was that just 17% of that population showed any allegiance to ZANU-PF. But what we've seen since the coup is that in the diaspora, we've seen more open support for ZANU-PF. In fact, soon after the coup, I happened to be in a number of diaspora groups, which have since been kicked out of the ZANU-PF ones, which is so sad. I don't know why they kicked me out. But what I thought was really interesting is that in these WhatsApp groups, you would have 50 to 200 members that were open now in their support for ZANU-PF, something that we wouldn't have seen before the coup. So I think I want us to be mindful when we talk about whom the diaspora supports, because in the past we would have said that most of the diaspora support was for the opposition, but clearly that's no longer the case, or maybe that's never been the case, right? So previously, maybe people didn't feel comfortable in coming out and saying that they supported ZANU-PF, but now more and more people are open supporters of the ZANU-PF. And yet, so while we have people that are openly supporting either the opposition or the ruling party, the missing link is that the political parties themselves haven't done much to mobilize the diaspora. So one of the questions that was brought up when Professor Kanyenze was talking is, well, is the diaspora voting? Is the diaspora engaged? And we know that neither the MDC nor the ZANU-PF were in support of the diaspora's right to vote in the past. Now, recently, the MDC has come out and say that they support a diaspora vote, but that was not the case in the past. In the past, we know that both political parties, MDC more clandestinely, right, so more behind the doors, were not in support of diaspora vote. And one of their reasons was that they felt that ZANU-PF might manipulate the diaspora outcome, particularly for voters within the continent, within the African continent. But ZANU-PF itself was very open in saying that they don't support the diaspora vote. And I think they published 101 reasons for why they didn't support the diaspora vote. But one of the outstanding reasons was that some of their members were on their sanctions list, and they were arguing that if we support the diaspora vote, we won't be able to go out and mobilize our voters. But we know that since since the coup, things have changed, right? And so ZANU-PF has a lot of people that can travel abroad to engage with the diaspora. The MDC has for years had significant political parties within the United States, within the United Kingdom, in Canada, in South Africa. And yet none of those branches have been active in recent years, even as recent as the 2018 election. We didn't see much activity on the part of political parties in encouraging people to go back home and vote. We didn't even see them actively encouraging people to donate money. We did see individuals within WhatsApp groups, and so just using WhatsApp data, using Facebook data, we saw individuals, non-official individuals, encouraging their friends to donate money, whether to the ZANU-PF or to the MDC, but we didn't see party officials engaged in this. And so that's a big question for the political parties in Zimbabwe, that, well, why aren't you engaging with the diaspora directly? The reason why this is important is that we've seen from other countries, right? So with Mexico, for example, which is right next to the US, so it's easy to collect data for that. We've seen that Mexican political candidates tend to actually travel to the US, to the various hotspots where Mexican citizens are resident, and asking them to either go home and vote or to make financial donations. Recently, I think, this weekend, the last 2 weekends, we saw a lot of engagement from the Malawian diaspora in the US, encouraging people not to go home and vote, but encouraging them to tell their family members to vote in the most recent elections. And some people have been arguing that the outcome in the Malawian elections, we can give credit to the diaspora, but I mean, it's still very recent, right? The election was just yesterday. So we can't say for sure that the diaspora did a lot, but we can look at the 2016 elections in the Gambia. That's one clear example of the diaspora being active in voting. So people went back and voted to vote Jammeh out of office. And we've also seen the Gambian diaspora actively giving money. So there is this gap between what the diaspora is willing to do and what the political parties have been willing to ask of the diaspora. Now, we know that the diaspora has been very active in supporting political parties, right? So financially, we don't have data for how much ZANU-PF has received, but we do have some data to suggest that the MDC depended heavily on money that was coming in from the diaspora. So the diaspora is giving support in multiple ways. So they're sending money to their families. So that's money that's used for everyday purposes, food, clothing, whatnot. But they were also sending money directly to the political parties through the political parties in the countries where they are resident to support those political activities back home. So that's on one hand on how the diaspora has been actively engaged. In terms of the people in the diaspora themselves, are they interested in the politics back home? I found that collecting from my data, Makina's data, Pasura's data, over 90% of Zimbabweans are actively engaged in the politics back home. And by actively engaged, we mean that they follow the news actively, right? So if you look at websites like New Zimbabwe, which, you know, it's declined in following in recent years, but early on you had a lot of interest for those diaspora servicing websites because people want to know what's happening at home politically. We know that the diaspora is engaged in conversations online. We know that the diaspora is raising their voice. We've seen in the past protests at embassies, right? So the UK embassy, we've seen a lot of protests there. We've also seen a lot of protests in the US at the UN. So when we've had UN events or when officials have come in to the US, we've seen the diaspora protesting, right, and raising their voice for issues that matter. More recently, we've seen the diaspora hosting events with various government officials. And so I think this is a really interesting way of moving from just protesting to making policy-related proposals that might eventually lead to development. So the kind of development that we've seen in countries like Ethiopia, where we've seen the diaspora building hospitals. But in order for us to see the diaspora building hospitals in Zimbabwe, there has to be real engagement. And I think this is where the diaspora is sort of sitting at the edge of their seats, waiting for officials to say, well, look, if you want to build a hospital, these are the proper channels that you can take, and these are the benefits that we will give you. So we are also seeing the diaspora trying to leverage and saying, well, we are willing to do ABC, right? So whether we're building hospitals, we are giving to cyclone relief, but we're also asking for something tangible in return. We're asking for the right to vote. And we're seeing that the diaspora is going beyond party, right? So people are not just talking to MDC people or talking to ZANU-PF people, but the diaspora as a collective is saying we are asking for real policy engagement that will allow us to give more to our home country. In terms of the legitimacy of the diaspora voice, I think this is somewhere where we don't have a lot of data on it, but I think we can look at, and so social media engagement is tricky, and I don't want to overemphasize the importance of social media, but we have seen that social engagement online from the diaspora is important. Now, the question is whether or not the Zimbabwean government or the political parties actually care. But we've seen an increase in social engagement. And by this, I mean, if there are press statements being made in the home country, I've been having my students keep track of how many people are showing up to each press statement and where are the people domiciled. So we find that when the government is giving official statements, about 60% of the people that show up online are people that are domiciled in the diaspora. And I think that's really critical, right, in terms of the diaspora making their voices heard. Now, whether or not government officials are actually paying attention to the comments that the diaspora is making and including those in their policy making is an entirely different story. But what we do know is that the diaspora is interested and that they're engaged. And I'll pause here because I do want to keep it succinct and to focus on political party engagement with the diaspora, but we can go on to other topics if people have more questions.
Thank you. I actually have a couple of questions, and quite a few people are disputing your assertion that post-coup diasporians have warmed up to ZANU-PF. And they're saying these are the messages I've received privately via Zoom. They say, true, there was euphoria at the coup at home in the diaspora, but that has fizzled out at home and in the diaspora. Can you comment on this, please?
I would want to agree with that, but the data doesn't show that, right? The data just doesn't show that. And this has been the challenge for the Zimbabwean diaspora for a long time, where people have not been willing to acknowledge that there is support for ZANU-PF. Now, I'm not saying that 50% of people in the diaspora support ZANU-PF, but I'm saying that it is certainly more than what we thought. And the support is there. And actually, this won't get me in trouble because I got kicked out of the group. But one of the things I found super interesting in the recent year is that in the MDC groups, when there's a call for money, right? So when there's a call to give donations to MDC, I would see the diaspora, the MDC supporting diaspora, giving $20 here, $30 here, $10 here. But when there was a call for financial support in the ZANU-PF groups, I was blown away that we were seeing people sending $1,000, $500. And part of what I thought was happening was that the ZANU-PF groups had a better way of shaming people who promised to give money and then didn't give money. And so that motivated more people to give money. But maybe the MDC wasn't doing the same. So we saw smaller donations on the part of MDC and larger donations on the part of the ZANU-PF group. And again, I'm not saying that the support is 50-50. I'm just saying that we've seen more open support for the ZANU-PF diaspora. And the ZANU-PF diaspora had Nick Mangwana as their top person in the UK. And Nick did a really good job of galvanizing support in the UK. And I'm sure that those people are still in support of ZANU-PF. And I'm not sure if it's because they're getting any direct benefits from ZANU-PF, right? So whether or not the people in England who are supporting ZANU-PF are getting access to particular things in the home country, like stands, like land. So that was a big discussion on the ZANU-PF WhatsApp groups that we were following earlier on, where people were being encouraged to apply for land. I didn't see anyone who actually received land at the time, but I saw that a lot of the engagement was on access to land, on access to farming benefits. So there was a lot of sort of this project-minded engagement. So one could say that those people don't necessarily like ZANU-PF, but they like the perks that come with ZANU-PF. Whereas somebody who supports MDC genuinely supports MDC because there have been no perks in recent years. I mean, early on between 2000 and 2008, we could have said that support for MDC was because it was linked to asylum applications, and that was true to some extent. But right now, there are no direct benefits or at least perks, right, to supporting MDC. So anyone who professes to support MDC, it's more intrinsic benefit. Whereas people that support ZANU-PF, then we could say, okay, so maybe they're doing this because they're getting these other outside benefits.
Is it possible, as you know, some people are writing that maybe those who support, like Francis says, don't you think the well-off in the diaspora are ZANU-PF supporters? If you're ZANU-PF, you can access the best education available globally and in turn get a good job. And also there's another one that says, ask people whether this support is not ethnic based.
So on ethnicity, let me just say that I've seen broad-based, and look, I struggle a lot with talking about ethnicity in Zimbabwe. I think it's so loaded, right? But what I can tell you is that I've seen support from various groups. We haven't coded to say whether somebody is Karanga or Manika or Ndebele or Chewa, but we can say that there's been sort of this broad-based support. And I will take on that challenge. So we'll try and see if we can code where people are from and the support for ZANU-PF in the diaspora. So I'll come back to that. If you will email me later, we'll see if we can get the data to you. In terms of are people well off, you know, people in the diaspora generally have become well off. And we already know that the majority of people in the diaspora were professionals back home. And the majority of those people supported the MDC. So the question of whether or not people are well off, I'm not sure if Francis is asking if they were well off before they came to the diaspora or if they are well off now. But generally, I haven't seen any differences in income within the diaspora, right? So whether or not somebody makes a lot of money in the diaspora, and that would indicate if they would support ZANU-PF. I think what we can look at is whether or not they have gained some benefit back home in recent years. And we won't be able to quantify this in the traditional economic sense, but we could say, and I think we could safely assume that those who have gained land in particular, so diasporans who've gained land back home are more likely to be ZANU-PF supporters than diasporas who haven't gained land back home.
Okay, and then final question before I move to Tendai Dumbichina. Can you just talk briefly about, you know, cultural differences that have emerged and, you know, also differences in lifestyles between Zimbabweans at home and, you know, Zimbabweans abroad? I asked this because it appears that there's now an issue of cultural rifts between the returnees and people back home. There was recently an outcry when returnees requested, you know, running water to be supplied to government quarantine facilities. And many Zimbabweans at home had not had water for several years and didn't appreciate, you know, these demands, which actually resulted in tensions. So how can the two assimilate?
Okay, you know, and allow me to sort of give my own personal outcry here, because my husband and I, we've just had a little girl, 2 weeks ago, and we're here by ourselves. And I've been sort of thinking about how nice it would have been to be at home and to have my mom and my mother-in-law and everybody sort of spoil me in the very traditional Zimbabwean way, right? That new mothers get spoiled. And part of it is because of COVID, but it's also because of this, the way that the diaspora has broken families. So in my other work, which is very depressing, we look at divorce rates in the diaspora. So culturally, one of the things we're finding is that there's a higher divorce rate for Zimbabweans in the diaspora than Zimbabweans back home. We've also seen, so that's on the depressing end of it. And with regards to are people becoming more picky, I think as people live in the diaspora in particularly developed countries, people become accustomed to having their basic needs met. And when people were debating whether or not the diaspora was asking for too much when they were asking for running water, I said we should think back to what life was like in 1995, right? And I remember that in 1995, I was in 5th grade. And one of the things that used to happen in our neighborhood every week is that we would have, in Hatfield, we would have our streets paved. Almost every week, we would have them repaved, right? And this was in Harare. We had access to running water. As a 5th grader, if you had asked me if I could imagine a Zimbabwe in which there is no running water, in which there is no electricity, I think my mind would have been blown. And so we've gone from that expectation, right, where little kids know that running water is a normal part of our existence, to today where little kids in Shtumbiza and other parts of the country haven't seen water coming out of a tape. So I don't think it's that there are cultural differences, but it's that the economic and political crisis has forced people to shift our understanding of what is normal and what is acceptable. And I don't think that Zimbabweans at home were necessarily saying that they don't want running water, but I think Zimbabweans at home are thinking about everyday needs, right? Getting access to bread, getting access to mealie meal, getting access to things that they need to survive. Whereas the people coming back from the diaspora are saying, well, this is not our country. This is not how the world works. And so I think both sides are actually asking for the same things. It's just that they have different immediate needs.
So briefly, how can they assimilate? How can the two assimilate briefly?
I don't think that the gap is as wide as you think, right? So I think people are having conversations with their families. I think the frustrations that we see online are more exacerbated than the real conversations that people have. So I'm often back in Zimbabwe, and I can tell you that once people get an opportunity to engage, and actually let me be succinct in saying this, we need as many people in the diaspora who can to return home as often as possible. I think that's the best way to bridge some of these differences. When people get to interact, when people get to sit down and have conversations with each other, I think some of these tensions become less tense, if you will.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Chipodendere. Now, next is Tendai Dumbuchena, a Zimbabwean based in South Africa. He's a former journalist and until recently an advisor in the government of South Africa. Tendai is well placed to understand the Zimbabwean diaspora in South Africa, especially as a member of the External Affairs Portfolio Committee of National Convergence Platform, or NCP. Tendai?
Can you hear me, Violet?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Nice to hear your voice after a very long time. My thanks to Dr. Mandaza for providing this platform for us to exchange information and ideas. Unlike Chipo and Dr. Kanyeze, I have not studied the diaspora issue globally. So my observations will be confined to Zimbabweans in South Africa. A few years ago, about 8 years ago, I was privileged to travel throughout South Africa to visit all prisons in South Africa. So that took me to all corners of this country. And the thing that struck me was the ubiquitous presence of Zimbabweans in all corners of South Africa. A situation which did not exist in the 1990s and only developed between 2000 and I would say 2008, 9, 10. I don't want to play a numbers game. I can't tell you how many Zimbabweans are in South Africa, but what I can say with confidence is that there are plenty of Zimbabweans in South Africa, represented in all economic sectors. I just want to make this one point, that there's a tendency to have a skewed view of the profile of Zimbabweans in the diaspora. In South Africa, definitely, there are a lot of Zimbabweans in high-profile jobs, in education at universities, finance in the corporate world, CEOs, CFOs, and teachers in schools, especially science and maths teachers. There was a concerted effort many years ago to recruit Zimbabwean maths and science teachers to fill a hole in South Africa's education system. And all these people are doing well. But the reality is that the majority of Zimbabweans in South Africa don't have it easy at all. They are part of the urban underclass. They are waiters, they are security guards, they are farm workers, they are artisans, builders, plumbers, carpenters, painters, cab drivers, etc. Right? And those people work to support their families in Zimbabwe. And it's a burden that is increasingly hard to bear given the depreciation of the rand against the US dollar, given the fact that the Zimbabwe economy for many years has been US dollar denominated. The support for their families has become increasingly onerous. So the majority of Zimbabweans have a hard existence in South Africa, but they have to work hard for their families. In fact, many of them live in very, very atrocious conditions because virtually all the money that they make is sent to Zimbabwe. And those people, in my opinion, would be quite willing to return to Zimbabwe if there were to be fundamental change in the form of a new political dispensation and an economy that is growing and providing opportunities for work in all sectors. Those people will, in my view, be quite willing to go. Those who are in well-established middle-class professions and so forth, and they've got their families here and so forth, they may not be so keen because the salaries that they earn here would be very hard to match in Zimbabwe. So Zimbabweans are represented in all economic sectors, as I said. The sad thing about it is that you have Zimbabweans who have a tertiary education and are unable to find jobs because of lack of a work permit, and are forced to do menial jobs. A lot of the cab drivers, in fact, one was an Uber driver, was a teacher at Goromonzi High School. I assume he was a graduate to teach at Goromonzi, and was murdered in Cape Town as an Uber driver. So it's that sort of experience which makes it painful to realize that people have to live that way because the situation back home is not conducive. Zimbabweans are most valued in the education sector. As I said, science and maths teachers, and many of them are from Zimbabwe. And they also have a very strong presence in the hospitality industry as waiters and managers. This may change soon as a result of COVID-19, which is decimating the hospitality sector, the small bars and the restaurants, and there are threats by government to employ South Africans in that sector. As you know, unemployment in South Africa is very high. The latest figures show a 31% unemployment rate based on a narrow definition of the unemployed, which doesn't take into account people who have given up looking for work. And this may see Zimbabweans in semi and unskilled employment at risk. Chipo said something that I have also observed here, that there's been a lack of activity or mobilization by the two main political parties in Zimbabwe for, I would say, the past 6, 7, 8 years. And so there is very, very little political activity among Zimbabweans in South Africa. They just seem focused on surviving and supporting their families. There was some hope after the November 2017 coup, and hope that some people whose lives in South Africa are hard and precarious might return home. Events proved otherwise, and there certainly is no incentive for Zimbabweans in South Africa to return home anytime soon. And when that situation comes, as Dr. Kanyeze said, organizations like the IOM will have to play a role in the repatriation of what will be thousands of Zimbabweans back home. Talking about political activity, my own view is that for people, Zimbabweans in the diaspora, to influence the host governments and institutions to support fundamental political and economic transformation in Zimbabwe, that can be done effectively only if in Zimbabwe itself there is heightened political activity. It's very, very difficult to mobilize for a cause in a country where seemingly there is peace and stability. So the two have to go in tandem. The mobilization by those diaspora to influence foreign governments and institutions to put pressure on the powers that be in Zimbabwe to effect meaningful change, and a lot of mobilization and political activity in Zimbabwe. The two have to go hand in hand. It is only in that context that the Zimbabwe diaspora can effectively lobby their host countries to support a clamor back home for a new political, constitutional, and economic order. This is the only way sufficient pressure can be exerted on vested interests in Zimbabwe to allow a process to unfold that leads to the formation of a national transitional authority. In the early 2000s, I'll say from 2000 to about 2009, there was a lot of activity by Zimbabweans in South Africa. And of course, the civil society organizations were very active then. And the political parties, especially the MDC, had a strong presence in South Africa. And relationships with civil society organizations in South Africa and neighboring countries were established, and these organizations assisted lobby their governments and raise awareness among the citizenry of the need for change in Zimbabwe. Governments are more likely to be receptive to lobbying by their own citizens and organizations. As I said, this was evident in the early 2000s in South Africa and Botswana, where civil society built strong relationships with counterparts in these two countries. In Botswana, civil society organizations formed an umbrella organization focused on the Zimbabwe crisis. This was a period of heightened political activity in Zimbabwe, so the two processes operated in tandem. It is important that civil society organizations in Zimbabwe and their offshoots elsewhere work in a collaborative and coordinated manner to avoid conveying discordant messages. Previous experience has shown the damage done by organizations knocking on the same doors, seeking support, and delivering divergent messages. There must be a strategic approach and program of action that is overseen by the apex body. I am not aware of any strong desire by Zimbabwean entrepreneurs in the diaspora to invest in Zimbabwe, but that may be due to my lack of knowledge of that sector. The level of political engagement by Zimbabwe in South Africa is extremely low now. My own observation is that people have not recovered from the election of 2013. The flicker of hope after November 17 did not last long. The prevalent mood is that of apathy and resignation. It stands to reason that not much thought, if any, is given to issues such as the National Transition Authority, reconciliation, and other issues that people raise. There have to be political developments in Zimbabwe to reignite interest and political re-engagement in the diaspora. Thank you.
Thanks, thanks, Tendai. I'm interested to find out or hear your thoughts regarding what Chipo said. You know, Chipo's political conclusions that post-coup, many people in the diaspora started supporting ZANU-PF. What do you make of that? What are your thoughts on that?
I can say with confidence that the majority of Zimbabweans in South Africa, those who are politically engaged, have always been supporters of the MDC. Right? That I cannot say what levels of support ZANU-PF enjoys, but the mere fact that there are a lot of votes in South Africa, a lot of votes in South Africa, and the mere fact that ZANU-PF, which has a lot of CIOs active in South Africa, is totally unwilling to extend the franchise to Zimbabweans in South Africa, to me is evidence that they know that they would not win the majority of votes in this country.
Right. And then just two questions, joint questions, one from Zeni Nyazema and someone calling themselves admin, but I'm not sure who that is. Can Tendai explain how the desperate non-professional Zimbabweans have become a burden to the welfare system of South Africa? And if they are asylum seekers, are they able to collect money from the COVID fund? That's from Zeninya Zema.
Okay, good questions. The decision by the government at the outbreak of COVID-19 was that everybody resident in South Africa, regardless of their status, immigration status, would receive support like food parcels and so forth. But we understand that this has not been happening, and the UNHCR has been involved to make sure that asylum seekers from Zimbabwe and elsewhere do get food and shelter. The other question on the burden of Zimbabweans who are struggling here on social services, that is a very hot political issue in South Africa. Especially in the education and health sectors. If you go to clinics and hospitals, outpatients in Gauteng, for instance, right, you'll find that in many cases, the majority of patients are foreigners, mainly Zimbabweans, Mozambicans, and Congolese. And that causes a lot of resentment among locals and is a contributory factor to the xenophobic violence that breaks out time and again.
Okay. Now, thank you, Tendai Dumbujena, speaking to us from South Africa. Last but not least is human rights and immigration lawyer Yvonne Mahlunge Gwashawanu. She's also a feminist and founding member of the MDC, the National Constitutional Assembly, and the Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights. Yvonne is currently the MDC presidential representative to the UK and Ireland. Yvonne?
Thank you, Violet. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Okay,
excellent. So a lot of what I had prepared has been said already by Godfrey Kanyenze. I find it difficult to call him Godfrey because he's Mkoma Godi to me. Nice to see you, Mkoma, after such a long time. So a lot of what I wanted to say has been said. So my contribution is going to be responsive rather than I may not bring a lot that is new, except probably from the UK perspective. So in terms of the demographic of the UK diaspora, just bear with me. My phone's decided to die on me now. So in terms of the UK diaspora, it's been in waves. The diaspora, the makeup of the diaspora in the UK has been in waves. The first wave of the diaspora in the UK was at independence, when we had the Rhodesians fleeing at independence. Then we had the second wave, people coming to the UK to escape the IMF structural adjustment policies and the economic ramifications thereof. And also onto that, probably the first wave of refugees post-independence, those fleeing Gukura, Hundi, and from Matabeleland. And then at the turn of the century, we saw the political upheaval coupled with the economic decline in Zimbabwe, which led to an increase in Zimbabwean migration to the UK. Chief among the reasons for migration, obviously political and economic reasons. And so in terms of data, I saw that Chipo had a lot of data. So being a non-academic, let me just throw in some data there. The UNHCR reported that in 2010, looking at the 2009 figures for the total asylum seekers in the UK, 1 in 4 asylum claimants in that year were Zimbabweans. There was a total of 29,800 asylum claims that year, of which 7,420 were from Zimbabweans. So that then led to an increase in the number of Zimbabweans in the UK. In fact, in 2001, the UK census figures estimated the total Zimbabwean diaspora, or Zimbabweans resident in the UK born in Zimbabwe, to quote the census correctly, was 49,000. If we move forward to 2018, we'll see that it increased to 112. That's almost more than double the total figure of 49,000 just 2 decades before. So again, going to data, non-official data that is, if you add to that figure the number of British-born Zimbabweans, as it were, and also undocumented Zimbabweans, then one would estimate that there's probably between, and these are figures that have been thrown around by organizations such as the IOM, between 200,000 to 500,000 Zimbabweans in the United Kingdom, anywhere between that. Looking at the demographic, the majority of these Zimbabweans are, as Komangodi has already said, displaced middle class, workers, people who would have formed part of the working class, your nurses, your teachers, your social workers, your doctors, your lawyers, engineers, such as that. So basically anyone who would have had a little bit of money, a little bit of extra cash, and was able to afford an air ticket to the United Kingdom. That's your demographic of Zimbabweans in the United Kingdom mainly. So they are well educated, mostly working in the health sector, medical, also in professions such as social workers, starting off in the NHS as workers, then transcending mostly to becoming self-employed agency workers, for example. An interesting recent development being, and ongoing development being that Zimbabweans are now transcending or evolving from being employees to being employers, as a lot of them move on to becoming business practitioners in the health and social care industry. Zimbabweans have maintained contact with home. Almost every Zimbabwean I know has social contact, regular social contact with family members at home. And I think we'll find that this is probably mostly standard. Strong economic ties, sending remittances, supporting family. Most of these remittances, from my own personal observation, no data there, are mostly through informal routes of remittances. So I don't have any data for this, but just based on the activity that I have followed on the various platforms that I'm on, where people are exchanging rates on a daily basis of what is the exchange rate. It's a normal social phenomena. Zimbabwean diaspora participates in all sorts of social activities, church, religious activities, and so on. Are involved in spontaneous drives to support worthy causes, organizations such as Cyclone Idai, the recent Chutumbiza Community Kitchen, for example, various COVID support mechanisms that people have been involved in. And of course, there is organized political activity as well. A lot of Zimbabwean social media activity on social media platforms, very popular with Zimbabweans, extremely popular. Part of the evolution of the Zimbabwean diaspora, which is typical, I suppose, of diaspora in transition. And I'd be interested to hear what the views are on this, is that as they have become more and more entrenched in the countries in the UK where they are living, Zimbabweans, apart from supporting family members back home, appear to be becoming, as they become citizens of the UK and their children that identify more with being British than being Zimbabwean, they are divesting, in my view, from their investment in Zimbabwe. And what we now see is traction or a movement of funds back to Zimbabwe to support or to maintain family members, so subsistence remittances rather than investment remittances. So investment remittances appear to be in the minority. Very few Zimbabweans are invested or involved in investing back in Zimbabwe. I want to bring a discussion around the potential of the Zimbabwean diaspora, situated in regards to the activity we saw after the global political agreement, the GNU in 2009, the way the Zimbabwean diaspora, particularly in the health sector, was very much involved and invested in getting involved in activities to improve Zimbabwean, to improve and go and volunteer in Zimbabwe in the health sector. We saw, I'm aware, for example, of the King's College Center for Global Mental Health, which partnered with Dr., I can't remember his name now, around the friendship bench, Dr. Shibanda, I think it is, around the friendship bench, which has been very much embraced by the international community in terms of an alternative to formal structural mental health support. So it points there to the wealth of and available resource from the Zimbabwean diaspora. If the GPA were to have developed into a more safe political transition, whereby people could participate in a non-partisan platform and engage in resourcing and rebuilding the country. There was so much zeal for this, particularly, I say again, I refer again to the fact that a lot of people took unpaid leave from the NHS and went and performed voluntary work in hospitals in Zimbabwe. I just want to touch on a few things and respond on a few points and cautions.
Briefly though, Yvonne, because...
Am I already 7 minutes up? Oh my God. I thought I was speaking very fast. Okay, we mustn't assume, here I want to go on the importance of the National Convergence platform. It is important that we do not assume that the Zimbabwean diaspora, particularly from my observation in the UK, is heterogeneous. It is not. And there is still a need for nation building and a need for that spirit of belonging to be fostered. You will see that Zimbabweans are still regionally divided, whether we are talking of the Ndebele Shona divide, the Karanga, Manyika, people, even in social interaction, people are still very much divided. There was a failed nation building procedure or process, if you want to. In fact, there was none at independence, and there is need for that, which is why I believe the NCP is so important in terms of building a national dialogue and discourse for, and also coming up with a genuine social contract and new rules for how we do politics, how we dialogue as a nation. Can I just be allowed to respond to one or two points raised by Chipo? I think it would be unfair given my MDC accolade.
I was actually going to ask you about that because both Chipo and Tendai said that there's very little political activity that's happening in the diaspora, and it'll be good as one of the representatives of the MDC to comment on that issue. Is that one of the issues you wanted to respond to?
Yes, I'm not sure whether it is because Chipo is no longer on the social media platforms, but from my standpoint, I see a lot of interest. In the last 2 weeks, we are aware that the MDC, for example, has launched a new website, which has provided a platform for Zimbabweans for the first time to donate directly to the party, not having to actually join the MDC in order to donate to the political, to this political cause. We are aware of the way the MDC is being put out with regards to having access to financial resources, and therefore it is an opportune time, I think, for Zimbabweans. And in my own capacity, from the inquiries I've had overwhelming support. In fact, I've even had family members who are in ZANU-PF who have come to me and said, I can't contribute directly because I fear I may somehow be caught out, but can I give you money so that you can pass my contribution on to the MDC? So I am very positive on this development. The MDC has always been pro the diaspora vote. Throughout, we have had, as Chipo pointed out in passing, we have had issues with the mechanisms for voting that are in place. ZEC, if ZEC cannot run elections domestically, we would have problems with what it would do here. Where, but having said that, it is important to note that the MDC supports very heavily a call for the enfranchisement of Zimbabweans. Zimbabweans should be entitled to vote. Every other nationality is able to do so. Most other nationalities are able to do so in the UK. In fact, I'll go back to SB Moyo's own undertaking, which he made shortly before the Zimbabwean elections of 2018, where he said that we don't have the resources, but given the resources and given the time to put these resources in place, we will give the diaspora a vote. ZANU-PF support, I think it's important not to confuse the general Zimbabwean euphoria that gripped all of us, myself and Violet included. We converged at Zimbabwe House in 2017. We were hoping for the best. It is normal that we would do that as Zimbabweans. We were badly let down. And it is important that we separate that euphoria that we all felt, that it was justly so for us to feel, and a support for ZANU-PF. Nick Mangwana, whom you mentioned, is himself a case in point of corruption at a very high scale. He has been given a stand. There is evidence rife on social media, if you care to look for it, that shows that he has benefited from being from the work that work in inverted commas that he seemed to have done for ZANU-PF in the UK. So we need to be alive to this point.
Okay, we'll come back. We'll come back to you, Yvonne. Let me get some because there are quite a lot of people who've raised their hands and they also wanted to contribute. But I'll come back to the panelists, and then you can say some more about all these issues. Let me go to Farai Madzimbamuto. Is he still online? His hand was raised. Farai, you have to unmute your mic.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much. The moment had passed, but I still have I do have something to say. The first thing I wanted to just to get back to the issue about the diaspora engagement, that you know, which actually we don't actually have. I mean, okay, there's all this discussion which has been going on, let's say, for a very long time. But what we don't have is a program to say, you know, these are the diaspora issues that, you know, apart from the issue about voting, there hasn't been anything else concrete that, you know, that we can put forward as a program to say, you know, this is what we should be fighting for as a diaspora or engaging with as a diaspora. And I do want to agree with Chipo that actually the political parties you know, have only looked at what they can get from the diaspora, but have not actually said what is the trade. You know, what are they what are they offering, and what can they, you know, what can the diaspora give? So I think we need to get to that stage, because this discussion about the diaspora has been going on for as long as I've been out. The discussion has been going on, but there hasn't been, what is actually needed is a, you know, like a program to say, this is what's on the table, this is what can be offered to the diaspora, and this is what the diaspora can do or contribute to. Yeah.
Right, Chipo, can you thank you very much, Farai Mazimba-Muto. Can you respond to this? What exactly do people in the diaspora want, and how can they get it?
So in conversation, I think the diaspora vote is critical, and I don't think people need to do anything to get the right to vote. There's some conversation on people's part that the diaspora has to give money back to the country, they have to invest, they have to do all of these things. And I don't think the diaspora has to do any of that. People's right to vote is just their right to vote. So there is that. I think people want ease of access to documents. We know that recently the passport issue came up, where initially the prices for passports were really high for the diaspora, and that's problematic. And again, I think I'm thinking about certain things as a new parent. How do you get a birth certificate for your child? How do you get a passport for your child? And these are all things that should be fairly simple. There is a difference in how different embassies respond to this. So I understand that some embassies, for example, the embassy in Kenya has a much simpler way of doing things than the embassy in the US, for example, but I think the diaspora wants that. So the diaspora wants access to their country and the right to participate. People want to be able to engage in politics on social media and not get targeted for doing that. So when people make comments online, they don't want to get to the airport and end up in jail because they've been participating in politics. And their participation shouldn't be tied to any financial benefits that they give to the home country. People want to be able to invest in development, and people don't want to engage in corruption in order to engage in investment. So we know that for people to get access to farms, it's not straightforward. So some people are lucky, I suppose, that they apply for farms and they get them right away. But we know that for the majority of people, if you want to get access to land, if you want to get access to procurement projects, you have to give some kickbacks to people in government. And people don't want that. People want to be able to just engage in their home country without having to pay anyone kickbacks to do that.
Okay, and on the issue of remittances, Godfrey Kanyenze, two questions. One from Muya Nyaundi on Facebook. The question is, what do you mean by official channels for remittances? Isn't Western Union official? And also Miles Anderson has a similar question where he says the diaspora can only become effectual if they threaten to withdraw their remittances. Perhaps then the government will take them seriously. Your thoughts on these two? Godfrey, you have to unmute. You have to unmute your mic. Have we just lost?
Okay, it was saying I could not unmute myself. Now you can hear me.
Okay.
What we mean by official channels, basically Western Union, Mukuru, all those through the banking sector, etc., they are part of the official remittance channels. So those are captured by the data that the Reserve Bank provides. So I think that's the official. The unofficial, basically, mainly through irregular migration, kit and kin will bring your cash or goods, or if you're in South Africa, you can send via, the various sort of transporters that are basically plying the route from South Africa to Zimbabwe and back and forth. So basically that's the informal. That's what we mean by formal and informal. Threatening to withdraw is problematic in the sense that, as we highlighted, and also if you look at the latest Zimbabwe migration profile done by government, much of the investment, as we have highlighted this evening, are actually subsistence-based. They are going towards consumption. They are going towards requirements for the family's upkeep. So in essence, if you threaten not to send, you are actually undermining yourself or your kith and kin that are in Zimbabwe. Because like we have said, studies have shown that remittances have provided a very critical social basis for social protection in Zimbabwe. At a time when the official or the government social protection systems are not very, very strong. So in essence, it's very difficult to simply say, I threaten to withdraw simply because of those dimensions. However, what is quite interesting, though we didn't discuss it this evening, is that there is a flurry of protocols, policies, frameworks that are being established even at regional level, which would directly encourage diasporians wherever they are to participate. Things like we are discussing in the SADC at the moment, the portability of accrued benefits, so that you can move with your benefits, whether you are moving from Zimbabwe to South Africa or South Africa, wherever you're going, you can move, you can accrue your benefits. Because we've had a historical problem where even those people that worked in the past under the Wenela system, if you remember the Wenela system, there are still a lot of the pensions that have not been collected. So essentially, these are some of the issues that are being discussed that I think and feel are going actually to heighten the discussions around these issues in the case that they really touch on the livelihoods of the people that are in the diaspora. So I think this is quite interesting. We're working with IOM, with ILO, and they are now encouraging discussions, especially within the trade union movement where I belong. There is a lot of discussions already around these issues, how to ensure that the rights of migrants are protected, issues that I think they highlighted, which are very serious in countries like South Africa, the issues of xenophobia, the issues of dialogue between governments to ensure that the policy frameworks that are being developed now at SADC to encourage orderly and safe migration, and also to protect the rights and interests of migrants. I think these are issues that will touch individuals at a very personal level, and we encourage individuals to become much more connected to discuss these issues and also the political developments. I would also hasten to say we didn't discuss, when we talk about support for ZANU, MDC, etc., we should actually be careful in the sense that these parties are not homogeneous. So if you look at the factionalized nature of our politics, it depends. When you say you support ZANU, then someone would say on the ground which aspect of ZANU. Because it's very clear that these parties are no longer, which highlights the critical importance of the non-state actors' initiatives, such as the National Convergence Platform, where I think if we can converge as civil society and create a critical mass, then we can bring to apply pressure on governments for change to happen.
Yvonne, before I bring in a couple of more people from the floor, would you like to respond to what Godfrey Kanyeze has just said? And also, there's some who say, why are people fighting for a diaspora vote when you don't pay taxes? Your mic, Yvonne.
Thank you, Violet. Firstly, Godfrey Kanyeze's point on, just repeat Godfrey's, sorry, I was writing.
Hello?
Repeat your first question.
So your responses to Godfrey, especially when he says there's now time for a national convergence platform.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah. Yes. I completely agree that the NCP, in terms of the framework and what I've read of it and gone through, it is the correct framework. But as with everything else, you spoke of critical mass. It requires political power. It requires a majority, a forming. And civil society can't do that. Civil society doesn't have followers, right? So the political reality is that you need to engage with political actors who will bring critical mass that gives you then the justification to bring about the change, or that gives you the legitimacy rather than justification. That's the first point. The next point, I also wanted to point, when you're talking about accrued benefits, in terms of the Zimbabwean diaspora in the UK, I think a realistic position is that we should accept that immediately there is not going to be a decamping from the UK to Zimbabwe. An enabling environment has to be created. Certain things, cohesive policies, stabilization, economic stabilization, fiscal policy that you can actually anticipate that tomorrow you don't wake up and someone is declared something, right? So which is why, again, I come back to the NCP and some sort of transitional authority, because we can't wake up and it has happened. It is a process of building it up. And as it is being built up, diaspora is a key stakeholder, 25%, potentially 25% of the country. So it's a key stakeholder and should be engaged. And it's good that you have started to engage it in platforms such as this. I also wanted to just refer to the example of Ghana, which gave tax breaks and other incentives to its diaspora. I think 2019, I can't remember what it was quite called. I think it was called a comeback home or something to that effect, targeting mainly Ghanaians in the UK and Europe and in the USA. It actually ended up catching on, given the slavery connection and so on, catching on to African Americans, and Ghana ended up exceeding by 3 times its expected rate of tourists for 2019 alone. So it's not just harnessing our own Zimbabwean diaspora, but as things, and as we also spread the good news of the change in our country, it has the potential of attracting other actors within the larger African diaspora.
All right. And on the voting, briefly on the voting versus taxes.
Oh, yes. The voting, the vote, a Zimbabwean's right to vote comes by way of being a Zimbabwean, just by citizenship. It's a born as of right. We are actually being denied something that is imbued, that we have as of right. I also wanted to just very quickly respond to the point made earlier by Chipo with regards to there being a direct support for ZANU-PF. Again, no data involved, but just go on the social media platforms. Just use that as a bar, if you will, of whether there is support out there for ZANU-PF. And as Tendai said, they know it, which is why they deny the diaspora vote. They know it. They know that if Zimbabweans were enfranchised, the likelihood is likely to be dire. There may have been a period a little earlier in our historical life as Zimbabweans in the UK where the majority of Zimbabweans were asylum seekers, right? There was a real risk that if enfranchised, some might actually have ended up voting to maintain the status quo so that they could be regularized or benefit from that. But I think we've moved from that majority of Zimbabweans are regularized. Majority of Zimbabweans do go back home now and would like to have a Zimbabwe where they can actually be able to return home, be able to invest in home, be able to go back to the period where, as Zimbabweans, when you arrived at Heathrow pre-November 2002,
no.
non-visa entry country, we're a non-visa entry country, you know, where you are not suspected to be immediately potentially an illegal immigrant on arrival.
Okay. Let me bring us, we have quite a few hands up. So briefly, let me go from the bottom. Marcy Wilkes, can you come in? And in your submission, can you also just, be specific on what do you think the diasporans want and what is it prepared to do? And also, can you let us know where you're calling from?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I think it would be impossible for me to sum up what individuals who are Zimbabweans holistically want. I think it would be narrowing down a person's potential or wants into one umbrella of a unified existence of what we need. We are individuals as Zimbabweans, and I think the diaspora has afforded us the capacity to want different, to want to be critical, autonomous, and seek gains that reflect our own special uniqueness. Being Zimbabwean does unify us in terms of politics, in terms of issues on the ground, things we would like to maybe not do, send money to parents when we can be doing other things with our money. Black tax is one that kills us. We would want that to stop. So I cannot speak for every Zimbabwean, and I think that's always been the problem for Africa, where individuals are narrowed down to one want or one need. We are different, we have different aspirations in life, and that also calls to the issue I have more to do with human rights activists and those who speak for us in the diaspora. They tend to already come with a bias of what an individual Zimbabwean should be. So they will speak mostly about the issues affecting people who are not ZANU-PF. Human rights mean that every Zimbabwean must be able to be critical enough to choose a political party of their choice. Whatever that motivation be, that person must be free to do that. So when we start to talk on issues on how many ZANU-PF have been, how many have started to like it, it shouldn't be an issue in Zimbabwe. The issue should be people should be free to vote for who they want to vote for. Because even if we had to have our political landscape change and the MDC become the ruling party, what we will then end up with is ZANU-PF people being the opposition politics of Zimbabwe. Will you then advocate for them as you did when the MDC people were the opposition politics? So in every part of our existence in Zimbabwe, we are going to have a ruling party and an opposition. So if human rights activists choose an agenda to always be pro-opposition, then they should prepare themselves to move to being pro-ZANU-PF people when they start to become the opposition politics. Stand for human rights and do not stand for party. There are other political persuasions in Zimbabwe, but they seem to not have no one paying attention. For example, the MDC itself has been accused of many human rights violations on social media. It has become ZANU-PF in its ethos, in its way its supporters behave, but human rights activists have ignored that. So the social media space has been unsafe because of this need for Zimbabweans to be the samey. So as a Zimbabwean, I would like human rights activists to stand on the rights for humans, not the rights for political parties to exist in Zimbabwe. So that is the difference. When we start to do that, we will have a problem going forward, where tomorrow I will want you to be ZANU-PF activists when they become the opposition in Zimbabwe. So that's number one. The other issue...
Briefly, Marcy, briefly, because we're running out of time.
Right, I've been waiting for a while, so I'll try and be really quick. The statistics that have been published around the diaspora makeup, the profile of the Zimbabwean diaspora, has always been contentious in the fact that Zimbabweans have got an exaggerated ego around who they are. So there's an elitism around the description of what Zimbabweans are. For example, we are thought of to be professionals, to be people of work. The true picture of Zimbabweans in the diaspora is exactly the picture of Zimbabweans in Zimbabwe. We have professionals, we have people who don't work. If we look at UK statistics, for example, the number of Zimbabweans who have now, before even COVID, went to the Department of Works and Pensions and are on benefits is actually increasing over time. So we have had the makeup of Zimbabweans change over a long period of time, but the Zimbabwean statistic collectors seem to not want to paint a real picture of what Zimbabweans are. They tend to want to look at the elitist Zimbabwean who is a business person, who is in the health and social care. They don't talk of the Zimbabwean people who are still in the process of immigration. The Refugee Council many years ago spoke about the people who stay in limbo. Those people are not spoken about. They are not working, they are not trained, and those people are in the benefit system. And they consist of Zimbabweans that are not spoken about. Same in South Africa, we have Zimbabweans in prison systems. So when we talk about the Zimbabwean diaspora, can we be real about who the Zimbabweans we are talking about? Because if we're just advocating for Zimbabweans who can contribute because of what they have become, then we neglect to say, what are the issues for Zimbabweans diasporians in the diaspora? What are the type of things they may need to assist them to have the capacity, the means, and the access to be contributing members in Zimbabwe? There's a reason why they haven't become, because of the issues they face in the diaspora.
Okay, thank you very much, Marcy. Let me go to Brighton Chireka, and may I remind everyone, please, what we want to hear from you all is, what is the diaspora going to do now? So Brighton Chireka, what issues do you see as pertinent for the diaspora and for the development in Zimbabwe,
Yeah, I think what the diaspora need to do is to be strategic. Because I think the diaspora, we've got issues, as Marcy has said, that we cannot speak for everyone. But we cannot expect to be heard when we are going to speak as individuals. We need to have alliance, we need to come together. We are so disjointed. If you look at the aid that we have sent in COVID, lots and lots of thousands have been sent, but we have done it individually in small groups. We represent Diaspora Health Alliance, where we've got 40 organizations. What we are trying to do is to get people together so that we can scale up what we are trying to do. So the challenge that we are finding is that we are not strategic. One, we need to have a think tank in the diaspora, so that the diaspora policy is actually run and formulated by us in the diaspora. We cannot have a diaspora policy being done by people in Zimbabwe. That's not fair, and that's not what represent us. And also, when you look at IOM, it needs also to engage with us, the diaspora. We have to invite ourselves to the table, because IOM comes with some policies or some projects which are half-baked, which do not address the needs of the diaspora. So the diaspora, my message today is that the diaspora has to sit down among itself and speak with one voice. What is it that they want? Yes, we know what we want. Diaspora vote, we want it. And we also need proper channels of how we can actually have projects in Zimbabwe. We need to do away with corruption. We need to do away with all the problems. For example, if professionals want to go back to Zimbabwe, they need to be registered easily. It's complicated to be registered and work in Zimbabwe. But also the diaspora, for it to demand that, they must also have a data of skills that they have. Right now, if you ask us, how many doctors do we have outside? What skills do they have? How many nurses do we have? What skills do we have? We don't have that. So it shows that we are not strategic. If we say we are learned outside, where is the evidence? So my message is to diaspora, from today onwards, we need to have our database, have our think tanks, come up with policies, and let's go on the table. If we don't go on the table, we'll be on the menu and we'll be chewed. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Brighton Chireka. Brighton Mutebuka.
Right. Good afternoon, Violet, and good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you again for affording me this platform. I've got a number of points that I've noted, and I'll try to be as brief as possible, but while it's getting to the point. I take the point that my brother and namesake Brighton has raised about being organized. I think that's certainly something that's very constructive and something that's highly positive in the evolution of the Zimbabwean diaspora community. However, I think that the biggest challenge that confronts us as a diaspora community is that on non-political issues, it is possible to advocate for change and for policies that perhaps the current regime can be receptive. The biggest challenge we face relates to politically sensitive matters or asserting rights which are of a political nature, rights which necessarily threaten the regime and its hegemony or power retention tendencies. For me, I would say that I identify with what my brother Sikosan Malunga said in our last segment or Zoom meeting, where he said that, it's clear that there is a deliberate and calculated strategy by the current regime to stay as clear as is possible from embracing policies that threaten its hold on power. So it's clear that freedom and rights, including the right to vote, which is an inalienable right, those should be non-negotiable. But we are naive if we think that just by organizing ourselves and agitating for that, then the regime is going to accept a policy which necessarily threatens its survival. So essentially, the biggest challenge we face across the board is that of a lack of political will. The regime is unwilling, it doesn't have the wherewithal to accept that, whether it's nation building, whether it's embracing credible policies which resonate across the political divide, to view that as a necessity in improving and building Zimbabwe as a country. So effectively, I would say that even this project, the NCP project, that's clearly a noble initiative. It's an initiative that Zimbabweans should rally behind and identify with. But it will not gain traction because it will threaten ZANU-PF and the regime's hold on power. So what's critical is for ZANU-PF to embrace the notion that they have to look at the country and have the country's best interest. Their vision has to go beyond power retention. So as long as they are, committed and almost fanaticists when it comes to power retention, it will not be possible to gain traction in those areas. Moving on from that, I would say...
Last point, Brighton, because we want to get as many people in.
Oh yes, absolutely. Just highlighting that I was part of an investment group that went to Zimbabwe in November 2017. There was a lot of interest. I had inquiries I was fielding inquiries from across the world from investors that wanted to invest in Zimbabwe. And I went there, but I was skeptical. Now, as long as the current regime practices policies like those ones I've highlighted, it will not be possible, one, for there to be movement in relation to diasporans, and two, in relation to investors themselves. And also to highlight that something that Chipo said about ZANU-PF support in the diaspora. I mean, I would say that I've represented clients, some who are ZANU-PF and some who are MDC members. And what I've tended to realize is that in terms of ZANU-PF members in the UK, they were previously dormant and non-active. And certainly, we tend to normally deal with a cluster of families that have got a legacy of supporting ZANU-PF, like Nick himself. He comes from the Mugwana family, and that's popular as a ZANU-PF family. But obviously, there are other nuances as well involved. Just rounding up and also saying that the coup moment itself in November 2017 was historic, and it partly accounts for the visibility that we have seen in terms of the active involvement of ZANU-PF, the more notable involvement. And finally, yes, in terms of political activity in the MDC, I think formal political activity is no longer being realized because a lot of people are now settled, and most of them now go to work and worry more about economic imperatives. And they are now more politically active on social media. That's where you tend to realize most of them. And in terms of numbers of, say, Zimbabweans, for instance, in the UK, I would highlight in passing that my experience is that there is still a significant chunk of Zimbabweans from the clients that I represent who remain undocumented even as we speak. So these would not ordinarily register on the formal platforms that perhaps Chipo would focus on.
Okay, thank you, Brighton. I'm sorry, we have to bring in others. Thank you very much for those pointers. And Norman Nyazema, you have to unmute your mic. Okay, it appears that he is no longer online. Mufudzi Musanyange.
Hello, Violet.
Hi.
Thank you. Well, okay. Most of the points, obviously, people have touched on them. But I think what is important for me as someone in the diaspora is that what we do have in Zimbabwe, which is a serious problem, is that we've got a huge population of people who behave as if they are politically active, both in action as well as in having that understanding of what politics is about. What you find, or what social media has actually made possible for us to see, is that the majority of people who engage in politics on social media have no clue of the issues that they talk about. What we mostly find is an emotional population. We've got people who are mostly driven by emotions, and a number of them, which is quite interesting, what Brighton Matebuka has just said, that you tend to have a lot of people who belong to traditional families that follow a particular political party. And this is what we find, since 1999, kids or children that were born in 1999 are now 21 years old. And they have always known, if they were from a political their parents were from a specific political party, that's the party they will always support, without actually asking the questions, what am I going to benefit from this political party? What are the changes that I would like to see in this political party? So my contribution is, I think, more than anything, what we need in Zimbabwe is political education. Making sure that our citizens understand the difference between a political party and the role of government, and what they should expect from their government vis-a-vis what they should expect from their political party. The other thing that is also important is understanding of what remittances are. I think it is very important for us to understand that that is private money. I don't think if we give an argument to say, well, remittance have to go through the official channel or whatever, it makes no difference, because at the end of the day, if we are saying, if I'm sending US dollars and those US dollars are going to arrive in Zimbabwe in US dollars, what my parents or relatives choose to do with them is their business. That shouldn't be a matter for the government to decide what they should do with that money. And they should not be taxed because that money was not earned in Zimbabwe. So that's my contribution. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And Isao Mawindidze?
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. You can go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Violet. I would like to sort of piggyback on what I think it was Brighton Chireka and maybe Farai Mazimbamuto have already said, in that I think it is important for us in the diaspora to realize that we are a constituency. And I think your panelists have already given a lot of data to show that you know, we're an important constituency. But what is lacking, as others have been trying to say, is for us in the diaspora to realize the power that we have and the contribution that we've made to Zimbabwe. Also, with the knowledge that there has been a lot of you know, brain drain from Zimbabwe to the diaspora, which means that I would like to say the majority of Zimbabweans, particularly in the USA, are professionals and people with an education. But our weakness is the scattered nature of this diaspora, in that we are not institutionalized enough to be in a position to lobby not only government. You know, governments by their nature, they don't deal with individuals. They deal with organized groups, but not only government. I think I want to emphasize on what Dr. Brighton said, that we can do things that do not necessarily involve governments or political parties, because we live in areas where we are free to, the freedom to assemble, the freedom to be able to do the things that we want to do. So the issue of you know, mobilizing the skills of this scattered diaspora is something that we can you know, initiate by creating these skills locator databases that identify the skills that are in the diaspora, where they are located, and who these people are, and gradually try to identify the needs inside Zimbabwe itself and how these skills can then be aligned to that. That is one. But on that factor too, in Zimbabwe itself, most professions are already institutionalized. You have teachers association, you have nurses, doctors, etc. You name it. Every profession seems to be, you know, institutionalized. This is what we need to do in Zimbabwe, in the diaspora too. I don't see why the Association of Nurses in the UK or in the United States should not align directly with the Association of Nurses in Zimbabwe, doctors, engineers, etc., teachers, social workers. And then this interlink is nothing initially to do with government, but this is citizens who are organized themselves, dealing with one another. There's no need why associations in the diaspora should not link directly with universities and start to have programs interchanging and being helped by the donor community. Lastly.
Okay, just your last point.
My last point is to do with the business networks, and it follows the same thinking. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll take two more. Reason, Wafaro, briefly, what is your contribution? You have to unmute your mic.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. I think an issue that I have not heard being talked about, although it is implied, is a polarity. We are a very polarized community as it stands, and we have been for 2 decades. And the irony of it is that we have people in the United States, Canada, Australia, UK. These are mature democracies, and there's a lot of tolerance, but people can see it, they live it, they see how people do things, and they're the same people that go on social media and fuel polarity in our own community. And I think what the diaspora should be doing, in brief, is to lead by example in terms of tolerance, because that's what you live in the community that is hosting you. I will briefly go to the statistics. I think what motivated us to the 25% initially was really political. It was politicking. People wanted to prove that there is persecution in the country, and figures were thrown around to say these are the people that have escaped the regime of Mugabe. And it's said that some of the statistics we hear have been adopted by academics to use for meaningful public policy issues like we're discussing here. Here in Australia, I've heard a lot of figures being thrown, but I do have figures. When you look at African population, South Africa, mainly white South Africans, obviously, at about 104,000 people here, seconded by Egypt at about 33,000. Zimbabwe is the third most represented country in Australia, and we're looking at 21,000 people. This is as of 2017. Probably these figures could be slightly higher now. But when you hear people talk, they talk in terms of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. So I think there's ways where we can improve on data collection. And the closet ZANU-PF supporter that has been talked about much, these people have always been there. It's just like what we saw with Donald Trump in the United States. You never know what people really think behind the scenes. I'm a writer myself. I have a lot of people who confide in you in what they really think about the political situation. And you see them on social media, they're saying a different thing. So there's a lot of closet MDC supporters, closet ZANU-PF supporters, and we can talk about that. But I think my last point would be, as the diaspora, we should be able to lead in drawing the distinction between public policy and party activism. People need to push the political parties to start selling public policy, what they really want to do. Now we have been practicing protest politics for a very long time. We create this devil that he has to go so that we live in a heaven. And so we demonize this group of people and say they have to go, they have to go. After they go, what is the public policy? What do we want to do? People don't want even they are lazy, they don't want to be pushed into that. If you query and say, tell me what you exactly want to do, they say, no, we just have to focus, get this man out, then we'll figure out. That's exactly what we did in 2017. Just get him out, whoever will be better, let's just get him out. And what do we see now? Is he better? That is the problem that we have. So we need the diaspora to lead in terms of really getting people to think in terms of public policy.
Okay, thank you very much. Before I bring in Tony Rila, I have Chaka Watch, who says Ndirimu Fundisi and is desperately wants to say something for a minute. Chaka?
And Fundisi, you have to allow Fundisi, but I'm not going to speak for a long time. My name is Chaka Ngwenya, and I'm grateful for this opportunity. And I'm saying to you, brothers and sisters, I know Zimbabwe is called an educated country, but really, you know, we are not educated, because if we were educated, we would not be, you know, going through this every year for 40 years or stuff like that. That's one. The second thing is that pertains to your question, what can the diaspora do? The two Brightons said it, Reason I think said it as well. We are a powerhouse. The diaspora is a powerhouse. But yes, we are very divided. But guess what? What we need to do, I'm telling you, we need to become a movement, not a political party. I'm not political. I don't have any political card. What we need to be as the diaspora is to be a movement that can change. a movement that can come in like a wave to do things. I'll give you an example. Right now, there are young people from Zimbabwe who are coming together, putting their monies together to do some projects back home. That is what I'm talking about. So that's what needs to be happening. Why don't we have a right to vote? We know the answers. Why is there so much corruption in Zimbabwe? We know the answers to that. But what can we do to stop it? You and I need to become a movement. We have to be a united people here in the diaspora. Forget about the political divide and all these other things. Let's become a people who are an institute, a people who are Zimbabweans, who want to help change Zimbabwe. And last but not least, we definitely need a lot of prayers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shaka. And Tony, sorry, you have to wait again for just another minute. Moses desperately wants to say something because he has been waiting for a long time. Moses?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Well, a lot of it has been said, which I wanted to say, so it's been repeated, probably twice or so. But I just wanted to say again, for me, the main issue is this political sort of divisions. And when you come to a forum like this one, I was expecting a rather non-political sort of discussion talking about ways forward and things like that. But then you hear people probably who are on the panel or something like that, tending to push towards a certain political affiliation in a certain way. There was talk of numbers, who supports who. And then I'll give you an example. I worked, for example, in the MDC here in the diaspora for a very long time. I had my own reasons to leave MDC. I said to myself, I cannot support this party for the following reasons. I will never vote MDC, but that doesn't mean I support ZANU-PF. If ZANU-PF stays in power because I didn't vote MDC, so be it. I would never ever support them again, given what I saw in the diaspora. So I think if we sort of move forward in a non-political sort of discussion, I think that will help. What Dr. Chareka said, I've seen a group of Nigerian doctors here in the UK. They've got a group, like a platform they use. Every year they go back to Nigeria twice in a year for skills transfer. Surgeons, pediatricians, they sponsor themselves and they go to Nigeria twice every year for skills transfer to doctors that are working in Nigeria. Something like that cannot be done in a politically divided kind of platform, in my view.
Okay, thank you very much, Moses. I'm afraid we've run out of time, but let's hear some last remarks, closing remarks from Tony Rila and then Ibo Mandaza.
Thank you, Violet. I've been listening very, very carefully to this long conversation. The two questions that these whole conversations were predicated on were, what do you want and what are you prepared to do? And I've heard a lot of conversation about what people want. I've not heard a lot of conversation about what are they prepared to do. And it's critical. Zimbabwe right now is a failed state, more or less. The people are starving, they're living in a major crisis. This is not a time for thinking about what it will look like in 2 or 3 or 4 years' time. It's a time for major action. And what I want to know from Zimbabwe is what in the diaspora are you prepared to do? I've heard lots of barriers and all the difficulties that people face, and they're huge. But the fundamental question is that the country is burning and it requires everybody to work. Now, what are the options? And I've heard a few options, and I heard a few options last week. One is support a national dialogue. That's really critical. Another one is that there needs to be a political settlement. That's absolutely clear. We cannot go on with this polarized process in there. And that has to happen internally, as Tendai Dumbachera pointed out. The inside and the outside has to match. But the outside has to be clear that Zimbabwe is not in a place where we can afford the luxury of time. We are on the edge of very, very serious unhappiness and difficulties within us. So the question for the diaspora is that you have to get active. You have to get active in common cause with the ordinary people of Zimbabwe, right? You have to lose all your preconceptions about what the future might look like, and you have to focus on the now. And it's imperative for everybody in the diaspora, all the people who've been conveying all this money and keeping people alive, you can be damn sure right now that they are in deep trouble and they need your help desperately. That means you've got to get clear about what you are going to do and what you are going to support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony. Ibo Mandaza? You have to unmute your mic. Comrade Ibo, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here. So just 3 points. One is just to say, well, we have captured the discussion very well. Our rapporteurs are there. Where the session has been well recorded. So on YouTube, it's been on Facebook. Where some of us have been writing profusely, so we've captured the discussion very well. We're also fortunate that the panelists had been pre-primed, and each of them brought into the discussion very important contributions, in particular our lead panelist, Godfrey Kanyenze. And his recommendations were quite brilliant, and we'd like to capture those as well. Secondly, is just to say that, we have realized how diverse the diaspora is. It's not a simple matter. It's very diverse politically, skill-wise, and I think we have been taking too many things for granted. We need to look at this sector much more carefully, as Godfrey Kanyenze has indicated. But above all, I think we had a very good discussion. Last but not least is just to say that the series of conversations will continue. We hope, inshallah, that we'll have every fortnight. In the next fortnight, on the 9th of July, we have a topic, Zimbabwe, constitutionalism, and the return of the military to the barracks. I don't want to talk about that, but I think it will be a hot topic. We'll have the requisite skilled people to assist Violet in the discussion. And then 23rd of July, we have South Africa's policy towards Zimbabwe, a case of the tail wagging the dog, indifference, incapacity, or harvesting on a neighbor's economic woes, ? So these are the forthcoming attractions, to use the term. But above all, just to thank you all, thank the panelists again, and of course, our very able moderator, Violet. Thank you. And the team, Robert, Tony, Michelle, and Tandy. Thank you very much. And Norman Mlambo, who's our rapporteur tonight. Thank you very much. It was really nice seeing people I haven't seen for many years through this wonderful technology from all over. We have 25% of our people out there. The figures, I think Godfrey will be coming back on that. I think we have much larger population out there than people than we're able to concede tonight. Thank you very much. Thank you and good night. Pizza. There's no music, Violet.
It's coming. Thank you very much, everyone. Yeah, I think we're having a technical problem. But just like Dr. Mandaza said, I would also like to thank our panelists and our discussants for an informative discussion, and also to Zimbabweans at home and abroad. Here's wishing us a Zimbabwe we deserve. And actually, like what most of the contributors said today, it's time to play your part. We all have a part to play. So we can do it, Zimbabwe. Good night, everyone.